This is an artificially aware original production.
What if I told you that language, this everyday tool you use without thinking, is one of the most potent forms of social control on the planet? Yes, the very words you speak, the way you string them together, the accent that rolls off your tongue, these aren't just innocent expressions of personality. They're badges, brands, little social cues that categorize, exclude, and sort you within an invisible hierarchy, like coded spells cast to secure one's place in society. Your language is your ticket or your roadblock, and every word you utter places you in a social order that's been designed long before you ever spoke. This isn't just abstract linguistics. This is raw social machinery at work, grinding out winners and losers, carving out spaces of power and subjugation, one phrase at a time. Language is no mere communicative tool. It's a weapon, a key, a barrier, and once you see this, you'll start to wonder who's really pulling the strings in this vast linguistic game. Pierre Bourdieu, name drop him at your next dinner party, had the gall to look at language and say, this isn't about vocabulary, it's about currency. And he wasn't wrong. Bourdieu proposed that language isn't just a neutral medium, but a form of symbolic capital. In the same way money buys goods and connections, language buys you access and recognition. People don't just hear what you say, they assess who you are based on the way you say it. The words you choose, the accent you carry, the tone you strike, they form a kind of social bank account. Those who own the language deemed acceptable in a society are rich in this symbolic capital, while others struggle in linguistic poverty, unable to access certain spaces, win certain jobs, or influence certain people. Imagine, every conversation is an unspoken negotiation, with each speaker assessing the other's capital, weighing worth through verbal currency. Bourdieu put it bluntly, language in its simplest and most raw form is a type of social power, and it's as unequally distributed as wealth itself. But how does this linguistic hierarchy take shape? It isn't written down anywhere, yet everyone seems to understand it, as if by osmosis. In society, not all ways of speaking are created equal. Some voices ring out with an authority that others can only mimic, and it's not just about what they're saying, but how they say it. Legitimate language, the kind you hear in boardrooms, government offices, and news anchors' scripts, is the product of a long process of social selection. Generations of societal rules and norms have crafted what we consider proper or educated speech, leaving little space for dialects, accents, or colloquial expressions that don't fit the mold. This linguistic ranking system doesn't merely differentiate people, it assigns them worth based on their adherence to these invisible standards. So if you speak with a local twang or use the wrong vocabulary in the wrong crowd, you're not just misunderstood, you're ranked lower on the social ladder. And without even knowing it, your words are shackling you to a certain class, a certain fate. Language isn't just a means of communication, it's the bouncer at the door to every significant social institution. Schools, workplaces, media outlets, all of them uphold a linguistic gatekeeping that keeps certain groups in and others out. Think about the way job interviews work. You're judged not just on your resume, but on your ability to speak well. Schools? They demand conformity to a standardized way of talking, rewarding those who master it and sidelining those who don't. This constant social sorting based on language reinforces class divisions, cementing power for those who already have it and denying it to those who don't fit the linguistic mold. Media, too, serves as both a model and enforcer of these language norms, casting certain accents as trustworthy and others as suspect. So as you're watching news anchors or listening to experts, you're absorbing not just information, but also a kind of linguistic code that says, this is how important people sound. And by implication, if you don't sound like that, society subtly nudges you aside, closing the doors on you one after another. This brings us to one of Bourdieu's most incendiary concepts, symbolic power. He argued that language is not just for speaking, it's for commanding. Those with symbolic power, think politicians, professors, CEOs, don't just communicate, they impose. Their words are backed by the weight of their social status, giving them an authority that others recognize, often unconsciously. Take a courtroom, for instance. When a judge speaks, their language doesn't just inform, it dictates, compels, controls. Or consider the language of academia, where professors lecture not just to inform, but to assert a vision of the world that students are expected to absorb and accept. In these contexts, language is a vehicle for reinforcing authority, and people listen not because they have to, but because the speaker holds a sanctioned position that society deems worthy of respect. Symbolic power means that certain voices are given an automatic respect, while others are dismissed before they even open their mouths. This is the very crux of Bourdieu's argument. Language is less about information and more about validation, about making certain voices matter and others invisible. So how does this linguistic capital stack up against other forms of capital? Bourdieu didn't stop with money or social connections. He showed that linguistic capital, a refined way of speaking, a particular vocabulary, the accent of power, can be just as potent as a fat bank account or a prestigious family name. But linguistic capital is unique because it's woven into the very fabric of interaction. You might not carry your economic capital into every encounter, but your words follow you like a shadow. And unlike cash, which can be counted or banked, linguistic capital is self-reinforcing, endlessly feeding off the social structures around it. People instinctively recognize and reward prestigious speech, treating the speaker with more deference and, ironically, more access to other forms of capital. Language is currency, but it's also a kind of social armor. It signals status at every turn, shaping interactions and subtly locking in power dynamics that keep social hierarchies as steady as stone. Bourdieu's idea of linguistic markets takes this metaphor even further. Think of language as a commodity, a product you sell depending on the situation and audience. On each market, whether it's a corporate meeting, a casual conversation, or a courtroom, the language norms shift, just like prices in an economic market. Certain ways of speaking will sell better depending on the setting. So in a boardroom, formal and polished speech might get you respect and influence, but in a neighborhood bar, the same language might get you ignored or even mocked. Linguistic markets are everywhere, and each one has its unwritten rules that dictate the value of your words. But here's the twist. Unlike an actual market where you can walk away, linguistic markets trap you. Every setting expects you to pay in the right currency, and if you don't, well, your words lose value, and so do you. This subtle but relentless demand to adjust keeps people in their social lanes, speaking the right way in the right place to be deemed worthy. Nowhere is this linguistic gatekeeping more powerful than in education. Schools don't just teach reading and math, they enforce linguistic standards, shaping students into the kinds of speakers society values. It starts early, with teachers correcting dialects, fixing accents, pushing kids to adopt a certain kind of formal speech. Schools become the first gatekeepers, subtly embedding the idea that there is a right way to speak and anything else is deficient. But this isn't just innocent instruction, it's the systematic erasure of linguistic diversity, a gentle but firm shove toward conformity. Students who come from homes where different dialects or vernaculars are spoken find themselves on the fringes, feeling their voices are somehow lesser or wrong. By demanding adherence to the dominant language, schools don't just educate, they sort and stratify, privileging those who naturally speak the dominant way and marginalizing those who don't. And this early training lingers, creating adults who either master the code or live forever in its shadow. Then there's code switching, a skill many people develop to navigate these linguistic markets. To code switch is to shift between languages, dialects, or speech styles depending on who's listening. It's a subtle art, a way of blending in or standing out as needed, learned through years of navigating different social expectations. But make no mistake, code switching comes with a price. Imagine the mental energy it takes to constantly monitor your words, to switch from the language of your family to the polished tone expected in professional settings. For many, code switching is survival, a way to access spaces that might otherwise reject them. But it's exhausting. The reward? Acceptance, maybe success. The cost? A perpetual sense of walking a tightrope, of being half one thing and half another, never fully at home in any one way of speaking. This balancing act reinforces the power of linguistic norms, with each switch serving as a reminder of the barriers they place between people. Accents, dialects, vernaculars, these are more than quirks of geography or heritage. They're symbols, markers of identity, class, and belonging. In a society obsessed with hierarchy, an accent can be your calling card or your scarlet letter. Regional accents might be celebrated in local settings, yet they're often stigmatized in formal spaces, signaling something less cultured or educated. And dialects. They're even trickier, acting as both a badge of pride and a potential barrier. In high-stakes environments like job interviews or media appearances, people often scrub out their accents, sanding down the edges of their language to fit a standard that is anything but neutral. And this is the quiet violence of it all. You're asked to erase a part of yourself to fit into a system that still doesn't quite welcome you. In Bourdieu's view, the demand for linguistic conformity isn't just about language. It's about demanding people shed their identities, their pasts, their communities to fit a narrow vision of what's acceptable. Every accent suppressed, every dialect erased is a lost piece of personal and cultural history. One of the strangest aspects of language norms is their invisibility. They're not written into law. There's no manual handed out in school or at work that says, speak like this, not like that. Yet everyone knows. You step into a boardroom, a classroom, a family gathering, and almost instantly, you adapt. These norms seep in from countless micro-interactions, comments from teachers, raised eyebrows in conversations, feedback from bosses, nods of approval from friends. These silent signals steer your language, and over time they shape your understanding of what's acceptable and what isn't. Language norms are powerful because they're unwritten. They're felt, sensed, absorbed rather than directly taught. And this makes them insidious, even insurmountable, because to challenge them, you have to confront something as intangible as the air around you. In this way, language norms reinforce themselves, holding people within invisible boundaries that are rarely questioned, yet rigidly enforced. But here's a question to turn the idea of language on its head. Does language set you free, or does it hold you captive? This may sound philosophical, but think about it practically. On the one hand, language is a tool of empowerment. It lets you express ideas, persuade others, build relationships. It's your voice, your unique signature in the world. But Bourdieu argued that this freedom is an illusion. The way society distributes linguistic capital and polices language norms means that language is always a controlled substance, doling out freedom to some while restricting others. Is language a ladder to climb or a prison cell to contain? Do the rules and codes that dictate acceptable language protect social order, or do they stifle voices that might otherwise challenge the status quo? This question isn't just theoretical. It's a live wire that touches every conversation, every interaction, every decision about who gets heard and who doesn't. Some people, of course, refuse to play by the linguistic rules. They reject the idea that their words should conform to someone else's standards. Movements like Black Lives Matter or feminist and LGBTQ+ activism have challenged traditional linguistic norms, using language in ways that defy mainstream standards. They reclaim words once used as slurs, invent new terms, and deliberately shift language in ways that express pride and identity, not conformity. Activists use language as a form of rebellion, wielding it not to blend in, but to stand out, to claim space in a society that tries to limit it. From slogans to hashtags, language becomes a form of resistance, an act of taking back power. This defiance is as much about rejecting social hierarchies as it is about embracing new identities. These movements show that language isn't just a tool for those in power, it can be a weapon for those fighting to reclaim it. Now here's where it gets personal. Stop for a moment and think about the language you use, the way you speak, the words you choose. Have you ever switched your vocabulary, softened your accent, or adjusted your tone to fit in? Maybe at a job interview, at a party, or even with family. Each of these small shifts is an exercise in linguistic power, a conscious or unconscious choice to adapt to an invisible standard. Maybe you've felt the pressure to sound professional or polished, or maybe you've sensed the need to dial down your vocabulary to avoid standing out. Think about how these choices affect you, how they make you feel about your own voice. Do you feel empowered or do you feel constrained? Bourdieu's theories ask you to question the forces that shape these decisions, to see that each linguistic choice isn't just personal, but also a reflection of the social pressures pressing down on you. Which brings us to the final question, the one that lingers like an unanswered call. Can language ever be truly liberated? Or will it always carry the weight of hierarchy, a tool to divide and control as much as to connect and empower? Bourdieu suggested that as long as language is tied to social power, it will always be used as a means of control. Even the act of breaking free, of challenging norms, often ends up creating new standards, new expectations. Is there a way to speak without being judged, to express without being categorized? Or is every word a marker, a brand, a place in a hierarchy that stretches far beyond the bounds of language itself? The question is open-ended, and maybe it's meant to be. Perhaps language, like society, will always carry its chains, but knowing they exist, seeing them for what they are, might be the first step toward a freedom that transcends mere words. And with that, I leave you to think about the power and price of the words you use every day. Language isn't just a tool, it's an influence, a currency, a complex set of chains that shape your world in ways you may never have noticed. Drop a comment below if you've ever felt that pressure to change how you speak, or if you've ever challenged it. Share this video if it made you think, and subscribe if you want more insights that dive deep into the unspoken rules that shape our lives. Until next time, stay aware, stay questioning, and remember, words matter more than you think. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.